Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the packaging best practice mashup we are doing today. We've got two great guests, or two great hosts, I should say. We've got Dan McCulloch and Claire Clouting. Claire, how are you going?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Good, thanks. You're all the way over there in WA. How's life there?
Oh, it's good. It's really sunny. We've got 37 degrees today, so a bit toasty.
Yeah, it's better than here. Dan, you're from Lullamund and you're in Melbourne at the moment, I believe.
I am. I'm actually at Stomping Ground at the moment. They kindly let me use their boardroom so I can join the webinar.
Great. Good to see our members helping out where they can. Now, before we get underway, this is kind of the first part of some packaging mashups that we're doing. If you're watching this after the fact, you can sign up for our mailing list. We'll put details about that out later on, and you can. We'll be doing more of these, so keep an eye on our social media and all that for more of these. We also had one recently with. I just need to make sure I've got the right link with ABAC, where we talked about labeling. So this one we're going to be talking about, I guess, what's inside the packaging. With ABAC, we're talking about the outside. So I'll put a link to that in the comments here in the chat, and members, you can go in to the resources portal and find all that information. And we've also got all the BrewCon presentations from last year as well. So plenty of information out there if you're looking for more info. But for now, I will leave it to these two to tell you all about packaging.
Lovely. Thank you, Luke. I'm just going to share our presentation. So thanks for joining us today, guys. Really excited to talk about packaging. Hopefully a few of you have managed to have a look at our best practice packaging fact sheet that we have up on the IBA website. So we're going to touch on a few bits that appear in that fact sheet today, but also we're going to sort of talk about some areas that we don't go into great depth on in this fact sheet. So we're going to cover off the food safety side today, and we're really hoping to come back for a part two, hopefully in the new year, where we'll cover off more things around quality, like your seaming and your CO2 and your talks and that sort of thing. So today, mostly food safety. So we're going to look at some foreign object prevention. We're going to talk chemical contamination, allergens, some hygiene management stuff, and then a little bit around traceability and record keeping. And then hopefully we'll have time for some general quality chit chat and Q&A at the end. So I guess the best way to kick off, from my perspective, is talking about legislation and what our requirements are as far as food safety. We're a business that provide food to people, and so there is legislation around what we need to do. So I've put up an example here. This is the WA Food Act, but you'll be able to find a food act for your state on your relevant health department website, or even just Googling, the New South Wales Food Act, and it should come up. But I'm sharing section 14 here because this is the one that's probably affects us the most as individuals and business owners. So as you can see, we do have to handle food in a safe manner, and there are fines and potential imprisonment if we knowingly sell food that is not fit and that for consumption and is unsafe. So for instance, our WA one is saying, the business could be a fine of $500,000. And for an individual, it can be up to 2 years imprisonment, which is pretty serious. And then on top of that, obviously you get civil lawsuits and stuff. So, it can be fairly hefty if you're found in breach. The other thing to consider is the Food Act, the Food Standards Code, which you'll find on the FSANZ website. And if anybody's interested, I'm happy to share a link with that. And that will be basically enacted or enforced by your local council. You will obviously have a local council, an environmental health department, and they probably come and visit you every 12 months if they're like our local council, and they'll just be having a look around in such things as pest control standards and that sort of thing. And they'll be the ones that sort of enact that food standards code. So this is, I'm just going to share with you the way we like to go around managing our food safety risks. And we've got a few lines here. We've got a can line, a bottle line, and a kegging line at Gauge Roads. And when we get a new piece of equipment, first thing I like to do is a mind map And this is just an example of what I use to start thinking about the types of risks. And generally, when we talk about food safety risks, they fall into a few categories. We've got physical, chemical, microbiological, and allergen. And pretty much all of the stuff we're going to talk about today will fall within one of those 4 categories. Physical being your foreign object risks, chemical, which I know Daniel's going to talk a bit about, things like getting caustic and what have you in your product. Micro, which we're reading about quite a bit at the moment, with regards to recalls for secondary ferments and that sort of thing. And then allergens, which is starting to become more of a hot topic really in our industry, because people are doing more interesting beers, like peanut butter porters and things like that. So it is a real concern now within the brewing industry. And then we'll touch on legal a little bit. So these are really great, these mind maps. So this one is an app I use called XMindZen, but there's loads of online tools that you can look at, and some of them are free. And I just find it's a really good way to, sit together with your group. So I'll get the brewers and the packers and myself and maintenance, and we'll just come up with this and we'll work out all the areas we probably need to think about. So I'm happy to share more details on that software if you're interested, or even, you can see what I've put together. And then from there, once we've got, an idea of what sort of risks we're facing, we use a very basic risk assessment. This is the Gage Roads one, but again, if you can do a quick Google and you'll find all sorts of risk assessment matrices online. You just pick one that you think fits your business well. So you can see here, ours covers off health, quality, but also reputation, which is really, really important, and often comes hand in hand with things like, recalls and quality and food safety issues. And from there, that gives us the opportunity to sort of know what to throw our resources at. So we'll obviously be tackling the critical and high risks first, and make sure that we've got actions or things in place to address those before we move on to the moderate or low ones. So first off, I thought I would start talking about what I think is our greatest foreign object risk in our industry. And those are the ones that happen after rinsing. So rinsing is such a critical point for packaging, because obviously anything that enters the product stream after you've rinsed is not going to come out of the product. It's too late. You're going to put the crown on, or you're going to seam the can, and that's gone. So your rinsing is so important, but there's so many types of rinsing that we use in this industry. So you can see from the pictures on the right-hand side, that's actually our new bottle rinser here at Gage, and it uses filtered water. And on the right-hand side is a couple of can rinsers, and they're air rinsers, where it inverts the can and then uses filtered high-pressure air to blow out any debris. So you might have something similar to this on your line, or something a little bit more simpler, but there's some key things you can do to make sure that you're getting the best out of this system. So the first thing is working out what your critical limits are, because obviously if they're failing, then you've got a risk of the presence of foreign material in your bottle or can. So you want to look at making sure that you've got a minimum water or air pressure, and you can pretty much set that, and we'll talk a bit more about how we'll challenge test that in a minute. But you want to make sure you set it and that it can't drop below a level that it's going to make the rinser not do its job properly. You want to make sure all the heads are operational and working effectively, and that if you're using water, your spray angle's at a good 90 degrees. And of course, what you're blowing or rinsing into the can is hygienic, because you don't want to cause another problem while trying to solve another. So here's a good example of some water rinsing. This is a job aid that we use on our line, and it's for the operators that run our packaging line to know what to look for in terms of what the water spray. So the green there is a lovely 90-degree angle, and you can see as it goes up and it hits the top of the bottle, it should be coating all sides of the bottle, so every bit of the surface gets rinsed. If it does start to go a little bit off-piste there, like the Take Action one, we allow them to run, but as soon as we can stop, it might be a changeover or something, we'll take action. Now, this can happen if you need to check your nozzles and have them on a preventative maintenance schedule, because you can get little bits in them, or depending on the water you use, you can get a buildup of sediment, and it will put your jet out of alignment a little bit. And obviously the ones on the right in the red area, they're not going to be achieving much at all. So it's a really good idea to challenge test your rinses, whether they're air or water. And it's a really good idea to do this when you're setting them up as well. So we like to pick some foreign objects here at Gauge that we think might genuinely be in our environment. You do what works for you and what you think might be your particular issues. So you see we've got some paper, some bits of glass. We managed to procure some fake insects. There's a nice big cockroach there. Pen lids, because we are using pens in production, bits of wooden pallet, and one of the trickier ones, which is the soft plastic, like your pallet wrap. And so what we'll do is we'll mark up some packages, and it's very important to mark up the package, because obviously if it does fail, you don't want it going through the line and then being labelled and going out to the consumer. And we just run them through, and we like them to pass 3 times. They should rinse out all of those materials. And we'll do that every 6 months just to make sure it's working. Cans are pretty good. So if cans are inverted, 99% of the time the stuff will drop out with or without the air blowers. But bottles are really, really tricky. And so we have had to make sure that we do get the correct water pressure to get all of those bits out. Actually, I'm just going to go back to this, because I wanted to bring in Daniel on this one. We were going to talk about some of the challenges around using different mediums to rinse bottles.
Yeah, I think you touched on there that it's important to have filtered water, because, depending on what the water is, that can be another potential risk of contamination and putting things in. I think the other thing is, if you are using sterilants, you want to make sure the sterilants are not going to degrade cans, for example. You want to make sure that if you're using something like PAA for bottles, that it's definitely rinsing out, because you could potentially oxidize the beer there with residual sediment in the bottles.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And PAA, we've definitely done some work in the past with that here, with regard to oxidizing, because they're having too much of that PAA rinse water left in the bottle.
As residual.
Yeah, and we've been here. We've done a lot of work to actually go chemical free on our rinser. So what we're using here at the moment is we've got a small UV that we use, and then it goes into a very low micron filter, and we're getting pretty good results. We do some micro testing on it, sort of monthly to 3 monthly at the moment, and it seems to be coming back pretty clean. But it is a really important thing to make sure you're not introducing bacteria or other risks, like corrosion and stuff, into the products. So thanks for that, Daniel. For those of you that are filling with glass, there are obviously a few more risks than with cans. So for some of the larger fillers, you probably have an automatic cullet wash broken bottle detector, but some of the smaller lines won't have this. And so there's different things to think about, which is obviously introducing more broken glass into bottles in the filler. Daniel, we were chatting about this earlier, and you were saying on some of the smaller fillers, making sure that they've removed all the bottles.
Definitely something like a Maheen, and you want to keep a log of that you've had a breakdown. So you want some kind of log for traceability. You want to take all the bottles off the Maheen. Some larger breweries have done studies on how far glass can travel when you have breakages. So it's probably best practice for some of those smaller bottling lines to take all the bottles off, dispose of all those, and have that in some kind of spreadsheet log that you've taken off X amount of bottles during the packaging run and noted that breakdown. So you have that traceability.
Absolutely. We log every single one here. And I think the thing is, when they burst under pressure, it is really surprising how far some of that glass can travel. I certainly think it's best practice, if it's within your means and budget, to have your glass line covered going into the filler and out as close to those filling heads as possible, because that will help you keep glass out of surrounding bottles. And obviously, as mentioned earlier, you'll post the rinser there, so whatever goes in is not coming out.
Also, rinsing Also rinsing during a breakdown, so that glass hasn't got caught anywhere in any rubbers, filler heads, etc.
Yeah.
Ensure that you rinse.
Rubbers is a really good. We found a couple of times when we've inspected the sealing rubber on a filling head, embedded glass. It does happen. That's one of our checks. And if you have got your cullet wash, you need to make sure that your pressure's interlocked with the machine. So if you do get a water pressure, drop, which can happen, when you've got lots of different processes going on in a brewery, that it's going to interlock with the machine and not go ahead and restart until that cullet wash has reached the correct pressure. That's actually a critical control point for us. And then you always want somebody to inspect the filler. I keep torches out by our filler, really good strong LED ones, so that people can look in sealing bells and various places and make sure it is all gone. And that log's going to be critical if you do end up having to go back and do a recall. So very important. The next area I wanted to cover off as a potential foreign object management area is equipment. And I think throughout my career, the biggest issues I've had with foreign objects is usually down to equipment, things like metal to metal, perspex, bits falling off lines. And it can be really difficult from a recall perspective, because often you don't know when that bit's fallen off the line and you might have a whole, batch of product there. So the best way to tackle this is to actually go out and do a full hazard assessment on your piece of equipment and have a look and identify the areas where you think things could happen, and where possible, make changes. So the photographs I've included here are from a craft canning line. And what you're looking at on the left-hand side is some perspex, which was actually, you can see it's above the filling heads. And the area above the perspex, it gets beer splashes and all sorts, so it needs to be removed to be cleaned from time to time. And by about the second time it was removed to clean, it cracked. And obviously perspex is really difficult because it's clear to pick up cracking. You can see some of the cracks at the bottom. And so on the right-hand side, you can see we actually replaced that part with a nice stainless steel panel, which was really easy to remove and clean, and it got rid of the foreign object risk. You can also see there's lots of cable ties on these things and little rubber bands holding wires and stuff in place. So this is always something to watch out, particularly on the lower cost machinery. They have to make it with things like aluminium, mild steel, brass, they're not always made to be kept super hygienic, but they're to come in within budget, what businesses can afford. So sometimes it's good to budget in a little bit on top for any changes or adjustments you might have to make to these lines to make them more robust and less likely to be affected by foreign objects. The other thing
also here as well, chemicals, making sure that the chemicals are going to be okay with all those different metals and perspex and the rest of it. So chemical degradation can happen, especially on zip ties. It's very easy for zip ties to come off, and then that's more foreign objects that could potentially enter your package.
Absolutely. And cable ties or temporary repairs are always a bit of a watch out, particularly I think because temporary repairs often become permanent repairs. But if you can afford metal cable ties and they're going to work well for an area, it's always better than just using the plastic ones. Yeah. Or just making sure that you inspect them from time to time.
Stainless steel cable ties aren't that expensive.
No, you just have to be careful, I suppose, because sometimes if there's a bit of movement, they will rub and cut through wires, and they can cause an issue in turn. Also, I had made a note on these as well, that the filling tubes and level sensors can sometimes be difficult to clean, and they can become scratched, which can harbour bacteria. So you can also, and I guess chemicals is another thing as well. If you're taking off coatings, you just have to be careful of the hygiene from that perspective. These are just some other sort of environmental foreign objects risks. So, I talked about mild steel. You do find mild steel still in a lot of equipment. And so you can get some flaking rust that finds itself into the environment. I've got the lovely clipboard in a bit of a bad state there, because we're all using things like that out on the line. So If you get the opportunity to upgrade to some nice stainless steel clipboards, which I know Officeworks do, they are a little bit more expensive, but it's better than having bits of black rubber in your product. The next photograph along there is actually a simple vent tube detector. So if you've got a bottle filler with vent tube, they can drop out, and this just simply picks up if there's a vent tube and kicks it off the line. Obviously, pest control is a big issue, and again, going back to sort of some of these craft canning lines and stuff, they can be difficult to clean. It's really important to check for things like ants, which aren't always easy to see. So I always like to keep torches in areas, and just make sure that you've not got things like ants starting to come into areas. Cockroaches, particularly the little German cockroaches, can hide in electrical cabinets around packaging areas, and also in like little hidey bits where there's wiring and things. Just be really aware, and if you've got a pest controller, make sure that they treat any issues that are popping up as they happen. In the bottom corner on the left hand side is some crowns. There's a crown issue. So this was something we picked up a few years ago, where we had the compound was not being properly pushed into the crown, and I probably didn't get the best photos here, but there were some where you just had the blob of compound in the middle of the crown, and then it could drop into the bottle. So luckily we picked up on it very quickly, be through some of our packaging checks, because we weren't getting a very good seal. But it's just something to be aware of. Do keep an eye on the quality of your packaging material. And this red wheel going into a line, it just shows, where, be careful where you've got things that could be grating or rubbing on each other, because you can create, metal to metal swarf, or metal to nylon, little bits of plastic swarf going into things. And then just on the personal hygiene side, I mean, we've got Band-Aid there, but there's things like earrings and all sorts of things. If people are working in an area, it's not impossible for things to drop into the product. So I think that will cover off foreign objects for now. I think we've covered a few areas. Daniel, do you want to talk to us about chemicals?
Yeah, so I mean, you definitely want to be checking pH, so you don't have things like residual caustic. You want to set a specification for pH, making sure that it hasn't changed from your bright beer release. Making sure that your pH meters are calibrated to within your specification, and that you're checking that. Obviously, participating in something like BIRA, where you are sending samples away, and round robin testing is a great way to make sure that your equipment is calibrated. Also, setting that specification is key there. And I think that example, Claire, you had a bit on the plus minus 0.2.
Yes, yeah. So that was some work that was done at Gauge here. We, to work out what really was the ideal range to pick up issues. And so plus or minus 2 is sort of the level at which you might start to see some adverse reactions, or be able to pick it up as a taint. Obviously, the chemicals we use are quite strong, but it is important to make sure that you get your bright beer pH, so you've got something to compare it to. So we take our first package off, and we check the pH and make sure it is within that plus or minus 0.2 of the finished product, of the BBT, and that will indicate whether we've had any potential contamination. There has been recalls, hasn't there? I think Stone and Wood, was it about 6 years ago, had a caustic recall. So it does happen from time to time. This is a good way just to pick up and get onto it before you package it all.
Another tip there is training for sensory. So you can use bicarb soda to mimic caustic. Yep. And that's probably another tip there. You can put bicarb soda in to again, have a look at that pH change.
That's a really good one. Also, it's worth saying, that's quite a fancy pH meter in that picture, but you can pick up quite reasonable ones these days. There's a website I've used over the years called Instrument Choice. I think they're based in Sydney, and they have like a really big range of different costing pH meters. So you can pretty much, you can get cheaper ones. But in absence of that, Daniel?
I think some other really important things out there, just even your pH strips for checking rinse water, to make sure that your sterilants or your Your alkaline cleaners are definitely back to rinse water, and those tips are very simple and quick. Also, chemical titration. So all of your chemical suppliers out there can supply titration kits, and it's very simple to make sure that you have the correct amount of caustic that you're using. And then once you get the kits, it's quite easy to then buy in bulk the chemicals required to keep running those kits. So I think it's really important to do chemical titration. And it's really like fish tank pH. It's just a couple of drops, count the drops, and then you work out the concentration.
That's good. And also it'll save you money if you're using too much chemical.
Yep.
This one here, this one was put forward. I was talking to our maintenance department. I was telling them we were going to talk about this, and they made a really good point that you can get leaking tank jackets and heat exchangers, and it's very, very difficult to pick up if you've got a glycol or ethanol leak into your packaging line. So I do ask, consider using food grade ethanol for coolant where appropriate. We use both ethanol and glycol on site, but it is something that we try and do where possible. You can also look at pressure testing for leaks and monitor your coolant usage because there are very complicated tests, I believe, out there to try and figure out if you've got glycol in your product. But I don't think it's something that's particularly attainable to small and medium businesses. It's something we've not really looked at. So yeah, and obviously goes back to having good maintenance and preventative maintenance programs, checking all of your gaskets and various seals. Food grade chemicals. This is our fancy food grade chemical cupboard that we got through our chemical supplier, actually. So that's another thing that can easily find its way into products if you're not careful. And gearboxes and things, if you send them off site to be maintained, it's always good to make sure that you tell the person that's doing it that you want them to replace any oils or lubricants with food safe or do it in-house. And then the photo on the left is just an example of where it's really good to label your chemicals because you can find you get spray bottles with all sorts of weird and wonderful chemicals in, so it's really important to label them where you can. Daniel, did you have any comments?
Oh, just probably proper bunding and storage as well of chemicals.
Yeah, absolutely, that's a good point. And I guess not having them out on the production floor unless they're absolutely necessary out there,
Yeah.
Put them away, get maintenance to put them away when they're finished with. Yeah. Allergen management. So as mentioned with, we're doing more exciting and new beers, using all different kinds of ingredients. So allergens is becoming a bit more of a hot topic for us, but currently in Australia, you have to label seafood, wheat, well, not wheat for beer, actually, I should say, milk, tree nuts, peanuts, shellfish, lupin, soy, eggs, and sesame seeds. And I've even seen shellfish in beer in the last 2 years. So I think we've had most of these. So it's just something to be aware of, and particularly cross-contamination is a big point. So on the right-hand side, I've just got a picture of, some simple allergen storage. So the main thing is when you're bringing an allergen on site, just making sure that you're storing it in like a designated area where it can't contaminate any more of your other raw materials. Bottom shelf always, so obviously stuff can't drop down onto stuff underneath it, and then mark it up so that everybody who works in your business, knows what it is, and it can't find its way into other things.
And I think also, Claire, with the rise of gluten and gluten reduced is sending it away. So the National Measurement Institute, and we were discussing before, not all laboratories out there can do the correct gluten testing that's required.
Absolutely. So that's true. So if you're making, ciders or any other products that you're making a gluten-free claim on, you will need that to be validated. But a lot of people, and even some labs that I've spoke to, are not aware that the gluten lab test that they do, which is on an ELISA, is not suitable for alcoholic or fermented products. You actually need to do a specific gluten ELISA for alcohol and fermented things, like, you know, kombucha and that sort of thing. So yeah, NMI would be a good one. I know that Agri-Foods in, I think it's Sydney or Melbourne, do it, but it is important to make sure you ask if you're having an external test done, that it is the correct one for alcoholic beverages. Otherwise, you might not get an accurate result, and obviously that's not good, and that could come back as well on your business. And in the middle there, we actually sourced some rapid gluten testing, which we use from time to time to verify, because we do a couple of gluten-free products here. And so the main thing is you run them, and then you want to make sure that your CIP and your cleanings that you do before you go back to your gluten-free products comes back clean. So it's just like a simple pregnancy test almost. And that they're actually not too expensive. So if anybody wants more information on that, I'm happy to point you in the direction of where we get them from. Hygiene management. So there's a few areas here. These are just some bits and bobs. We've obviously got some ATP meters, which I'll let Daniel talk more about. Next to that, I've just got a picture here of the can line, and that's just to remind me to tell you that if you're leaving packaging on production lines, that's something to be super aware of. You know, it might be that you leave the cans and your can lids on the line over the weekend. It is good practice to cover them up, because you can pick up insects or, you know, infection that way. So we tend to wrap our can lids with cling film before we shut down for the weekend, and wrap our pallets back up and put a cardboard layer over the top if possible. Doors being shut. I think you had some good points on shutting doors earlier, Daniel.
Yeah, you know, milling in and not closing the door while you're packaging and all that dust is flying around. ATP is obviously the best way to validate your CIP regime from not only rinse waters, and that's why I kind of like the swab there in the example from Kikkoman. It kind of grabs the liquid, but and there's many ATP meters out there, you know, some that you have to store refrigerated, some that are not refrigerated, swabbing filling heads, swabbing conveyor belts, just validating all areas of the line. I think ATP is one of the best methods for that.
Yeah, definitely. The one that is on the left-hand side is one we use. It is the actual piece of equipment is not cheap, but to your point, the swabs, we move to them because they're ambient stable and they have a 12-month shelf life on, and they're really good. We use them to not only in the packaging area, like you say, we do use them to release our tanks before we brew into them, and it gives you a nice rapid result, and so that's pretty handy. Oh, there's some lovely pictures of biofilm there on the bottom left-hand corner, which I think you'll cover off shortly. Do you want to talk to this one, Daniel?
Yeah, so I think it's important to have, you know, check that your beer is finished fermenting before packaging, you know, in terms of recalls, ensuring that if you've added fruit and hops and the rest, that you've done some form of forced fermentation to make sure that the beer is finished. You know, simple things like the incubated pop top in that example there are easy ways to do simple micro in an Esky type of incubator. And also durum chests for diastaticus if you're not going down the PCR path, and I've put there the Lallemand best practice for that. It's quite easy to do the durum tube test to look for diastaticus, you know, prior to packaging. You know, most severe diastaticus infections will normally, in 3 to 7 days, you'll have a result of some fermentation within those tubes.
Yep, I think this is so pertinent at the moment. I know we were talking to Dermot from Endeavour Woolworths the other day, and I think in the last 2 years they've had 14 recalls for secondary ferments, and obviously there's been cases where the cans have exploded and injured people. I think there was one even just recently. I think I saw, you know, for this thing. So it's definitely not going away. So it's good to increase awareness on how to avoid these secondary fermentation issues. Hygiene management, Daniel?
Yeah, I think just, being aware, rinsing things out, capping things off. I mean, there's a good example there of, not properly cleaning out something after using out from that particular valve. Making sure that you're cleaning without avoiding corrosion of various parts on packaging lines, hanging hoses, letting them dry out, storing fittings in sanitary ways, pipe work, how you set up your pipe work, ensuring that you don't have dead legs. Making sure that you have one-way valves on CO2 lines so that you're not putting beer up CO2 that could potentially be injecting into package, and the same with air rinsing and the rest of it, having one-way valves, and active pest management for sure. Fruit flies are a great example that get everywhere in a brewery.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I suppose on top of the fruit flies, I think that's a really good point, is keeping your drains in good condition.
Yeah.
And if you've got tiles or any cracked floor, because they will, if you don't keep it clean, they will get in there, and then you'll have a really difficult problem to get rid of them. I know that you can, and again, though they're not super cheap, but you can get, your ultraviolet insecticutors, and they will work to a certain extent with your ferment flies and flying insects, but you need to make sure that they're no higher than 6 foot from the ground, or else you just won't catch any of them. But really, the root cause there is keeping your drains and floors and walls in good condition and clean from any sugary or beery residues.
Yeah, foaming down before packaging. I think we've got to slide a little bit about that.
Do you want to talk to this one a little bit?
Yeah, I guess this is just setting some limits. I think they're the limits that you put in, Claire. But it is cheap to send stuff away for micro testing if you're not able to do it in house. And there's various places, some examples there of laboratories that you can send things off for. Obviously, ATB is a very quick in-house method. PCR is becoming cheaper and cheaper that are quick methods for packaging and not packaging. Microbiology, it's still cheap and effective to do in-house. It's just a little bit slower in terms of waiting for results. And you can send these off before packaging, after packaging, and have results. Even incubating package, if you just really want to go down a simple path and not using your Durum tubes, you could set your incubator quite high, or even an esky with heat mats or something to incubate package, to make sure that you've got more of a real time, 2 weeks or something, that to make sure that there's going to be no secondary fermentation in package.
Yeah, I do agree with you. I think micro is getting more affordable, and I think if you're in a position where you can hold your product back for 5 days before you release it for sale, which I know depends on a few things like space and obviously your stock on hand, but something like if you can send your start product off for a lactic test, rack array, or there's a few different ones you can send it for. It's good. It will give you an indication of whether you've got any spoilage organisms or something that might cause a problem. And then you can release your product, feeling pretty confident that you're not going to have any problems out there in the market. qPCR is great because it obviously picks up all of the spoilage, most of the spoilage products. But I would also caution with that, because it does only identify DNA fragments. So it doesn't actually tell you if what it's picking up is viable or not viable. It just tells you that it was there at some point in time.
Yeah, you still need to form up. It's where traditional micros making a comeback, because you do need to follow up to see if it's going to grow on those agars, like HLP or rack array, to confirm that. Again, incubating that package is another way to see, does it actually turn sour? Titratable acidity would be another way to look at that.
Yeah, it's absolutely. It's and also if you think of micro as well as being a useful tool, not just for releasing beer and beer quality, it's also really good to use it from time to time to just assess your environment and your cleaning protocols. I do think micro has two functions. One is, product safety or, product quality. But the other thing is, go and swab your filling heads, swab your packaging, swab your crowns, and send them off, and it will help you understand what environment you're working with and whether you need to make any concessions or actions around around what you're doing, because you could, there's all different ways that bacteria gets into the production line. So yeah, there's a lot around that one. We could probably do a whole episode on micro, couldn't we?
Yeah, we could.
Do you want to talk to this one?
Yeah, I think it's just listing out some critical control points. So, obviously, in terms of sending stuff out and holding, you usually recommend start, middle, and end samples of cans and bottles of what you want to keep, not only for a sensory review, but also to send off and test from your analytical point of view. What's the pH at the start and the end? Is there any difference? Do we have any microbiological spoilage from start, middle, end samples? There's an example of a keg tester that I built that you're able to flame and take a sample of kegs to be able to test those. So again, in kegs, you want to probably test the start of the run and compare that somewhere in the middle of the run, depending on your size. And you can send those off or put them in little incubators to force ferment, for example, using those. Packaging tanks, filter if it's draft packaging, your water jetters and CO2 pressure lines if they don't have those one-way valves, filler throats, table and conveyors, great places for biofilm to grow, especially depending on the oils that have been used or whether they're fatty, whether they're a dry type of oil. Crowner and lid sealer, build up and gunk over time and biofilm there. Also in the, where your crowns are coming down and where your lid seams are coming down are places that things can build up. Packages before and after filling are just some of the critical control points, and you really should list all those out and test various parts of those processes and have them not only as checks but good places to swab with ATP. You don't have to just use ATP swabs. You can get cotton swabs with plastic containers, and you can send those off for analysis to various external labs as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And on the keeping the samples, and I should have probably mentioned this earlier, I mean, if you have the space or the ability to store retention samples, and those that's really important. That probably touches further down as well on traceability and record keeping. I can't count the amount of times we've had to use our retention samples. So I'm lucky enough to have enough space to have a room where I can keep the start, middle, and end of everything we make, and I try to keep 13 months worth. It is a bit of a squash in there sometimes. But, if you get a consumer complaint or you find you've got a micro issue or a customer's coming back to you and saying, you've got secondary fermentation or something, you've got something you can go back to and you can narrow it down to what point in the run it happened, and you've got something you can actually look at. And often it's helped me work out when the issue is actually a distribution and storage or shop, beer shop point of view, because we haven't seen it in our samples. But it obviously does require a certain amount of space, which I know, many of us are limited on. Just something to think about. Foam party.
Yeah, so I think key things for foaming down the environment, I think not only before packaging, but foaming down a couple of times during the week. It's quite easy to get some pre-made plates from somewhere like Thermo Fisher, and you can put those plates out before foaming, and you might have something like, 1,000 colonies appear. You can put those plates somewhere simple, like next to a hot liquor tank, for example, where it's kind of warm, and that's a cheap way of incubating. And then you can put the same plates out again. For about 20 minutes should be more than enough. Put those out, and then you can compare after foaming down what the microflora of what's in the air. Closing roller doors during packaging, making sure that the mill door is shut. And then when you're foaming down packaging conveyors, you really want to make sure that you're removing soils from product swimmage, you're minimizing microbiological growth. Like talked a bit before about different track lubricants, especially if some of those track lubricants are coming from overseas in packaging lines. They could have fatty acids in there, oils that biofilm could actually grow and live in. What you're using to dilute lubricants can cause scale, so you might need some acids there to remove that. And then the reactions of those foaming agents and different chemicals that you're using with all the different metals on your packaging line. So you really want to check what your manufacturer recommends, and then also, get your chemical supplier to supply the ingredients and provide those to your packaging manufacturers to make sure that the chemicals you're using aren't going to cause issues on your packaging line. And then, surface swabs are fantastic, not only for filling heads, but to see if you've got biofilm buildup on your conveyors. While you're foaming, you want to make sure your conveyor's moving, just little things like that to basically check all nooks and crannies that you're not building up gunk on your packaging line.
That's a really good point. And I think a lot of the main chemical suppliers these days, a lot of them will have brewery experts as well, don't they?
Yep.
That you can call on. These are people who, worked in breweries all over the world. They'll do like the Heinekens and various places. They've got really good knowledge of using chemicals in the environment that we need to use them in. So don't be afraid to ask for help from your chemical supplier. And if you're not happy with your chemical supplier, I definitely recommend, shopping around, because it's you should get more than just chemicals from them, so it should be a complete service if possible. On to the traceability and record keeping portion. So I know we're running short on time. Just this is just to say, make sure that your coding's meaningful to you, that it is something you can actually use to trace your product. Where possible, have a timestamp, which I know can be difficult for some coders. But having that timestamp can be a really helpful thing, particularly in terms of foreign objects and, glass breakages and things like that. Or even things like your secondary ferment, it just helps you sort of nut out what's happened and how much you actually need to recall. And there's a photo down here. It can be coding on bottles in particular. It is really challenging. So try and make sure you put your code somewhere on the bottle where it's not going to rub. Like shoulders is never a good idea, because obviously it comes into contact. So a non-contact point, and try and use an ink that is particularly esky proof, that isn't going to rub off, and you're going to lose your code once the product's had a little bit of condensation on it. Having a really robust hold and quarantine process is important. So if you have an issue, you want to make sure that somebody else within the business isn't going to get confused and send that product out. It might be that you like to put hold stickers on your products before you've had a chance to release them. You might be sending them off for micro. It's just a good way to control your stock. And many of these labels I found just by Googling, Officeworks, Seatons, you don't have to have them specially made. I think that Avery one was $39 for like a big box. So, there's lots of stuff already out there in the market. And it's really important to, have them, because you can put the name of the person who's holding, so people know who to go back and ask about what's going on with it. So definitely something I would recommend, because I've worked in businesses where quarantine stock's accidentally been sent out, and it's a very awkward conversation to have with your customer.
I think those stickers are great. Most people just write a piece of A4 paper and try and stick it between a couple of boxes, and they get ripped off or they blow away. So stickers, I think, are fantastic.
They do. And I love the bright colours. They're so eye-catching. You're not going to miss it, particularly if you're driving a forklift or something. It's something, you need something that's going to stand out to someone who's, loading up loads of pallets as quick as they can. Did you want to cover off some of these items?
We've got IBA resources, and Claire and I are both on the ABI quality and technical committee, and we've been working with all the rest of the team on that committee in creating best practices, and there's a lot we're working on the moment that'll be coming out soon. So we already have a basic recall procedure that I think we're updating again to make it relevant for this year. You want to be doing some kind of mock recall. So what happens worst case? You want to go through that whole thing with the business as if it's a real recall, so that you're able to practice that, know where to go, know where to get that information. You want to be trending, performance, capability, troubleshooting. You want to investigate your consumer complaints, and that's where Claire was talking about having that library of best before for 12 months, 30 months of stock where possible, so that you can go back and check that against the consumer complaints, send those off for micro sampling, tasting with your blind panel.
Defending them as well. If you're not putting them into a database, they can seem unrelated.
Yep.
If you put them all in the same place, you know, if you're starting to get some and they're all the same or the same code, it's a good way to pick up that you've got a problem.
Definitely. Record keeping, so processes, raw materials, cleaning, packaging materials. You know, you want to have logs of these things, where you got them from, so that you're able to do root cause analysis. And we're actually thinking today of actually creating a root cause analysis as a future IBA mashup episode.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the final thing I guess I've got to say on traceability and record keeping is, you know, it's part of your due diligence defense. You know, we create food products, and if we are, you know, going to be investigated, or we need to stand up in a court of law and, you know, explain what it was that we did to prevent the issue from happening, i.e., you know, our due diligence, then these are the things that are really going to count in proving that you've been a responsible business. It goes back to things like having, you know, risk assessments, you know, having signed off check sheets, you know, for your, what would be your critical control points. They're all the things that are going to demonstrate that you as a business have, you know, done everything within your power to prevent somebody from getting hurt or injured by your product. You know, so it's really important to make sure they're filled out well. You know, you haven't got white out on them. They're signed off by the people who've done them. They're honest. You know, not you know, I do see a little bit of pencil whipping in my career, and it doesn't really, you know, I'd rather people have just said they'd missed the check, because you might use those to go back and work out how much product to recall or withdraw. So honesty is always the best policy when it comes to paperwork. You know, and as far as frequency of how to do checks, that's something you need to work on as a business, and work out, you know, balance your resources and how much time and availability you've got with how much you can really afford to recall or withdraw, because obviously, you know, those are the two things that you need to trade off against each other. But you know, it's it's cost avoidance, but you know, if you've got good record keeping, one day it might pay for itself 10 times over. So I can't speak highly enough of how important it is to really think through your record keeping. Have you got any more comments, Dan, or should we move on to Q&A?
I think we should move on to Q&A. I think the first thing here that I'd like to say, I'm looking at the YouTube, so I'll be able to check any questions that anyone has for myself and Claire, but I realise that it's 2:00 today during the time, so a lot of people might be on packaging line themselves for the moment. Yep. We have launched the forum on the IBA. There's lots of sections within that forum, so if there's any questions that you feel you would like to ask, there's also an anonymous function on that, and it subscribes to the whole technical team, and we can answer those questions anonymously. We can answer them later if you're watching this YouTube and catching up in the evening. Please have a look at the forum. It's something that we've just launched, and it's something that I think could benefit the whole brewing community.
Absolutely. Thank you. Have we got any questions?
I haven't seen any questions come through yet.
Hi everyone. Doesn't look like we've got any questions, but I've put a link to the forum in the chat, which will be available on the replay if you're watching this after the fact, or just head to the IBA website. It's under Documents and Resources. And I noted, Dan, you had an excellent presentation last year at BrewCon as well, all about yeast and testing for contamination. So if people are interested in learning more about that, I think that's a pretty great one to check out.
Yeah, thanks. It was on specifically on diastaticus, so what we mentioned a bit there for secondary fermentation.
Yeah, cool. So that would that's all on the IBA website. So we've got a lot of resources out there, and we're just starting to push them out with the quality team doing a ton of work. So some really cool stuff. And I think you guys are going to come back and present another one. Is that correct?
Yeah, we're hoping to do part 2 of the packaging best practice fact sheet. So that would be more on the QA stuff. Around, you know, I mentioned it, like seaming, crowning, that type of thing, more on the specifics. And we'd love to know and hear more about what people would like us to include in that, and we'll do our best.
And there is a comment in there from Two Bays. They prefer NMI for gluten-free testing for fermented products. So I think you guys mentioned them as one of the options as well.
That's great to hear.
Thanks to the team from Two Bays. So yeah, as I said, if you have any questions, drop them into the forum. As I said, it's in the live chat there, or access it through iba.org.au. So for now, thank you so much, Dan and Claire, for taking the time to present this. And I think I'm really looking forward to checking out the next one and learning a lot more about packaging. Cheers, team.
Oh, all right.
Thank you.